So I'm actually very much looking forward to this talk. It is going to be The Only Constant is Change, Students' Perspectives on Energy's Future. And the moderator will be Andy Uhler. He's the Energy Institute Fellow and a national and international public radio correspondent. I've been able to get to know Andy since I started here. He's now a friend, and if you start talking with him, I'm sure he would become your friend too. He's a very friendly Texan and also has a lot of Texas pride. So one of the things we've been working on is called, it's a podcast called Phases and Stages. And Andy is going around to different cities around Texas, 10 cities actually. He's been to Rockdale, Houston, and Midland so far, which I really enjoyed. All of the episodes, they get better every time, and I'm really looking forward to the next one. And also promoting it. Just so you guys know, I did put a stand over there with a QR code to the podcast, which I highly recommend to start listening to. It gives you a lot of pride on the energy landscape here, and also how it's changing, and how, it's just great. And then I also wanted to introduce you to Shashwati Dakuna. She is a PhD candidate at the Rosasco Catalysis Lab. I actually met her in person at STEM Day. Girls' STEM Day, just showing her dedication with my 8-year-old daughter. She really wanted to help us make ice cream, but it was a blockbuster hit and too busy. And then Pranav Thakur is here. He's a PhD candidate at the Brennicky Research Group, and he was also a winner of the poster competition and involved in it. And these are really awesome students in energy. I know you all are too. So thank you.
Yeah, that's good. Sweet. So thanks for joining us, y'all. Before we get started, and they're the smart people in the room, so I'm gonna sort of defer to them. But I wanted to give y'all, so we have 3 episodes of the podcast. Houston was the first one, then I went out to Rockdale and talked about coal in Rockdale, which a whole lot of people don't know that Rockdale was basically a coal town. It's like an hour and a half northeast of here in Austin. Episode 3, I ended up breaking up episodes 3 and 4 because I could have done one on the Permian Basin, but I ended up doing one on Midland, and then the next episode is about Odessa. And so I have a little preview of that one that I wanted to play you right now. A little tease here. Cool.
Odessa is actually a microcosm of what America is right now.
That's Ashok Kura. He's an associate professor of government at Odessa College.
This is the whole country, but it's much more visible here. And to put that starkly in perspective, America is a petrostate. We produce more oil than Russia. We produce more oil than Saudi Arabia. We are the world's #1 producer of oil. And with petrostates comes a certain kind of oligarchic politics. And we are seeing that happen nationally, and we are seeing it certainly happen locally. So the people in Odessa very much want drinkable water. They want those the streets cleaned. They want more leverage with their employer. They would like health benefits. But it is definitely the case that a certain kind of oligarchic politics means that people between the companies that have all this power and them have incentives to say, no, you're giving us too much already. Thank you so much.
But he says with some of the bad, Odessa is also a microcosm of what many consider the American dream.
This is still a place where everybody feels they can make it. And in many ways, they're not wrong. I mean, many people have made the money and bought land and created a sense of freedom and independence. Nobody thinks that the oil industry is bad. This is something we have to work with and make the transition. People want to see this thing through.
Phases and stages, circles and cycles, and scenes that we've all seen before.
Cool. So that was a tasty little tease. It's not really all about Odessa being, oligarchy, and but it is about sort of competing industry, competing for towns competing with one another, Midland and Odessa sort of competing for a workforce. Also, it was so interesting because they talked about this relationship being cordial And that was the word that they used, both cities, the economic development. I talked to both economic development officers in both cities, and they were like, yeah, it's really cordial. But they're also bidding for a lot of those tax dollars. So, the competition out on the football field sort of has made its way into the boardroom, it seems like. Anyway, the next episode's going to be ready. We're going to air it on Texas Standard next Thursday, so a week from today. And then you'll be able to download it. You can access all of them through that QR code, so give it a listen. Okay. I'm going to leave it to the students, but my interaction with sort of going city to city and talking to residents in those cities, like I said, talking to the economic development folks, it's so interesting because you'll be in Midland and then you'll drive 25 minutes west, and the attitude, even though it's kind of the same, kind of the same place, the attitude can change. The sort of concerns can change. And so driving around and going to different places throughout Texas, it's like the folks in Houston they're worried about completely different things than the folks in Rockdale, right? And then the folks in Odessa, then the folks in Beaumont. It's so awesome to sort of see how dynamic Texas is basically week to week for me, so. This has been a super, super fun project. I was also, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask that now that you've had the chance to kind of go around and talk to people in different parts of the state, how do you see them reacting to this changing energy landscape? And you kind of mentioned these attitude differences, but can you kind of tell us how you're seeing those responses differ? Yeah,
I keep asking folks if there's tension, right? Like, is there tension between folks who work in the oil patch and folks who work in oil and gas and folks who are trying to build renewable, right? Like folks who are trying to build solar farms and wind farms. And it's funny because there's so much vertical integration out there, there are a lot of big companies who are doing both or doing all of it. So if you talk to those companies, they're going to tell you that there is no tension and that everything is great. If you talk to some of the smaller developers, I think they do feel like there's a little bit of tension, especially because so many of the folks out in the Permian specifically, their grandparents worked in the oil fields. And so there's a little bit of like, well, this is our history. What do you mean you're going to come in and sort of change things? What does that mean for me? There's a little bit of, and I don't think it's naive at all, but I think there's a little bit of a fear of the unknown because you know what you're getting in the oil patch, right? Like the good and the bad, but at least you know. When you're talking about wind farms and you're talking about solar farms, you kind of don't know, right?
Right. And you were also just in Japan, right? Talking with folks about energy transition there, specifically with the hydrogen industry. Could you tell us more about what did you learn about the Japanese approach to kind of changing times?
Yeah, no, this was awesome. And Brian Korgel, to his credit, he basically put me in touch with this dude who knew everybody in Japan in the energy industry. Like he kept lining me up with meetings. He was so great. Yeah.
So the Japanese version of Brian.
Yeah. No. Exactly. He was your connector. It was so cool. But it was also so interesting. So I ended up. I flew into Tokyo and I had a bunch of meetings with government officials and I had some meetings with big industry. And then we went sort of around the country and then ended up back in Tokyo for more meetings. And the first meetings I had in Tokyo, I was asking these officials, specifically government folks, some pretty pointed questions. And they were delightfully candid and honest. And I was like, I literally had a microphone in front of these people. And I was like, you shouldn't really, I don't think you should say that out loud to me. Like, this is on the record. But what I came to sort of learn and figure out was I was asking all of these questions as an American journalist, right? I was projecting all of my ideas about economic efficiency, about the way that the energy industry is sort of supported or not supported with subsidies. Mm-hmm. Is there I kept asking about sort of what does the Japanese taxpayer feel when you're talking about a 25-year plan to support the hydrogen industry? Am I going to be mad if my tax dollars aren't being sort of shown to me in advancements? And it was so fascinating because it was like, that's not how Japan works. I kept getting that answer. It was like, you don't understand sort of what we're doing and how we do it. And so I had these meetings, and then I came back to Tokyo, and all of my meetings on the second part of the trip were just, tell me what I don't understand about Japanese culture. It was, I'm asking the wrong questions. What questions do I need to be asking to be able to tell this story? Because right now, I can't tell this story, because what I'm doing is projecting all of my American ideals into exactly what you're doing, and that's not fair, because what you're trying to do is different, and that's okay. I just don't understand it. So it's sort of one of those, like, help me understand, which is the cool part of the job, right? Like, I'm sitting here, and I'm going to get to talk to you guys about stuff that I don't understand. And so it really is. It's the most wonderful sort of like honest part of the job when you don't get it and you're like, oh God, just help me, right? There's a lot of vulnerability, but it was cool. For me as a journalist, it was like, oh man, like there's so much I don't know here. Like, no. It was so cool. I wanted to ask y'all specifically, Shishwati, about your research that. Again, I want to ask y'all about the different things that you've learned in the energy industry, and I ask these sort of you'll sort of you'll see this, the sort of broader, big picture questions, and I want to know about things you didn't necessarily know about the energy industry, about energy policy. Sure. Tell me about sort of the evolution from when you started your PhD to now, and the things that you've sort of taken away.
Yeah. So to start with, I just want to echo what you're saying. That you're often asking this. I have no idea what's going on. Right. That is the PhD student experience. So we're all in the same boat on that. Yeah. And Pranav and I are here today partly in our capacity in being in the Longhorn Energy Club. And so any students in the room, please join our mailing list and come to our events. We host lots of awesome things. Before Energy Week was organized by the Energy Institute, it was actually hosted by the Longhorn Energy Club. Nice. Before it kind of outgrew a student club scope. So really cool to be here, part of the programming this year. Yeah, so my research for my PhD is on electrolyzers for CCUS. If you're more familiar with Europe, maybe you have heard of power to chemicals. So basically, we take carbon dioxide, we make useful stuff. We drive that process using electricity. And
so is it the U in the, because carbon
yes,
capture?
Yes, that's absolutely right.
Okay.
So it's the U piece, the utilization piece.
Gotcha.
And Pranav will talk more about the carbon capture side of things in a minute here. So I would say, like, although my research is very technical, and I could tell you lots about the kind of technical questions I'm trying to answer, from the perspective of the energy industry, I'm very much at this intersection of energy, chemicals, climate. And I came in knowing the chemicals piece more, and that's a very business-to-business industry, kind of understood that aspect of it. But I think with energy, it's not just business to business, it's business to business, but it's also business to direct consumer. It has all these really complex downstream effects of any changes. And so I really came in from my interest in the climate space, and I think I've come to appreciate how complex of a system we're talking about and how much it affects everyday life and also is kind of the backbone of the economy. And so thinking about the implications of changes we make is really much more important and much more complex than I anticipated it being. And I think on the flip side, I came in thinking, oh, I'm like in engineering and we engineers are going to save the world. But I realized that we actually already have so many technical solutions in the climate space. And so what I've really learned is that we need to do a better job talking to journalists like yourself, talking to policymakers, regulators, to the business and operations side, people who are holding the dollars in their hands, and really communicating what's possible, what are the challenges, trade-offs, pros and cons, to help bring some of these technologies to life. And I think being at UT, like we see this amazing academic research all the time, but really bridging, like how do we go from that to the real world is where I think the huge challenge is, especially in a space that is so large scale.
It's the why and the who, right? Like, why are we doing this, and then who is it going to affect?
Yeah.
Pranav, what about you?
So I think you raise a really important point about the complexity of these systems and the role that funding and policy plays. Before I started my PhD, I wasn't deeply familiar with the complexity of the energy industry as such. And even my research right now, which focuses on like designing ionic liquid solvents for carbon capture technologies, is largely technical. So learning about these other factors about the energy transition, kind of ranging from policy decisions and economics to industry and even public needs has honestly been like a learning curve for me. And honestly, it is a learning curve even at this stage for me. And I realized how kind of intertwined research is with these factors, understanding how like federal incentives drive carbon capture projects, or like how state policies affect and influence the hydrogen adoption has been like a completely new perspective that I'm trying to learn about. But I think overall, like kind of understanding and bridging that gap between the lab and real world has been like a key learning experience.
Is our, and this is sort of a broader question too, is here at the University of Texas, here at the Energy Institute here, sort of, are we multidisciplinary enough? If you're drawing up your degree 4 years ago, would you be taking more policy classes? Would you be taking more economics classes, do you think?
So I think that we have some really awesome interdisciplinary energy spaces on campus, whether it's through the Energy Institute, through the K. Bailey Hutchinson Center. But I think a lot of our, let's say like day-to-day experience is much more siloed, at least in academia.
You're in the lab.
Right, exactly. And even if we're not in the lab, a lot of our research projects or collaborations with like Pranav and I might be collaborating with each other, but I can't say that we have written grants often with students in the LBJ school. And so I'd say like I think we're starting to have more of those conversations, but we also need to have more action that we take together.
That makes sense.
That's my take on it.
Yeah, I think that's my take on it as well, because I think as engineers, we don't kind of get trained on the business model side of it, or understanding how various policies affect us as engineers or like as research scientists in any way. I've recently been seeing a lot of new clubs that are opening up at UT that kind of focus on Texas energy and consultancy. They have dedicated like, we'll teach you a class every Sunday about like a business model, or we'll teach you about some policy that's really crucial for today's day and age. So I think that's happening. So
it's also going out and having those meetings with communities, right? Like figuring out what you were talking about too, the sort of who this is affecting. I'm doing all this work in the lab, but it's actually going to be implemented and affect these people. We need to figure out who those people are, and we need to talk to them, right?
Correct.
We've talked about my visiting Japan and going all around the state. I'm curious, from y'all's backgrounds and from your sort of being here in Texas, are there universalities about things that you're doing in your research? Are there things that, whether you're doing it here in Texas or sort of like doing the exact same thing or trying to do the same thing in Japan, are there universalities, or is there, again, we're sort of talking about the economics and the business and the policy of it, but are there things that sort of make sense here that can then be transposed wherever?
Yeah, I think one of the beautiful things about being in STEM is that we all really do speak a universal language of science and mathematics. And I think that's, it's very powerful because, for example, I can have a collaborator in Europe and English can be their third language, and they could even be from a different scientific background, but we share the same language of mathematics. And so not only can we have these direct collaborations where I can say like, hey, I can't figure out this aspect, or I don't work on the scale of modeling, can you step in here? But also we have this, we build on projects over time, and those are like really across regions. So in electrolysis, a lot of foundational work was actually done in Japan, and one of the sort of like central bodies of work within electrochemical CO2 utilization is from a very famous Japanese professor. And so we have a lot of these sort of international, really, in a way, they're like long-term projects, but very diffuse and not always organized. And of course, some more organized collaborations as well. But I think the fact that we can all speak this scientific language, that's really powerful as a universal basis.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I feel like while the specifics of research kind of vary, like there are certain universal aspects to this, like firstly, problem solving, curiosity, kind of the drive to uncover this new knowledge is kind of, I think, common between all disciplines, not just research, but like even journalism to that extent. And there's also like a shared emphasis in the scientific community on kind of designing experiments carefully and like analyzing data critically, questioning assumptions to that extent. I feel another common thread is collaboration, whether it's like within an interdisciplinary team, engaging with policymakers or like industry partnership, because at the end of the day, research is never isolated. It's always between a huge group. And I also feel like a really important point is kind of resilience. I feel like, at least for me, no planned experiment goes the way it's supposed to go.
Right.
And that's very crucial because I think
Yeah.
it's that ability to kind of troubleshoot, adapt, and keep pushing forward is what every researcher learns. And I'm sure everyone in the audience agrees with that.
I was going to ask you exactly that. Is there anything in your research, Pranav, that surprised you? I remember you and I talking about this a little bit earlier about your experiments are calculated and they're very sort of focused, but at the same time, they're not going to go the exact same way every time. But also, are there surprises that happened in the research for you specifically?
Many, honestly,
Okay.
on a day-to-day basis.
Sure.
But as I pointed out earlier, like my research focuses more on like designing solvents for carbon capture, and we are trying to constantly improve and the efficiency and viability, more especially for these new set of ionic liquids that I'm working with.
Yep.
But initially, a lot of my work kind of focused on like lab scale characterizations.
Yep.
But I feel as I moved along, I realized that if I really want to implement them, we kind of need to diverge from this isolated results from a lab scale,
Yep.
kind of focus more on like, can we simultaneously assess them together? And I feel like we've come across like really new results. Like I think more recently, which I shared even during my posters, that ionic liquids are like very much criticized for their viscosity. But from some new results that we have put together, it turns out that it's just a piece of the puzzle. When you
Right.
start simultaneously assessing all of these in tandem, you kind of realize that, it's just a piece of the puzzle, and you're trying to understand how various factors work together to that extent. And I think that's been really important.
Shishwati, what about you?
Yeah, I think you'll see here are some really common threads between our answers. So my research is really trying to address the question of what moves the needle on this technology? Like, what are the key performance metrics that we need to improve? What are the right questions to be asking to move this field forward?
Yep.
And in that sense, like what Pranav is also mentioning is kind of like assessing where are their trade-offs, where are their complementarities,
Right.
how do they connect with each other, how do we make decisions between them? And so, yeah, I think that's something that has, it turns up surprising answers, because I think often in research, we kind of jump into maybe like a question that seems interesting,
Sure.
but afterwards realize the question was supposed to be something else.
Right.
And that's really another aspect of research overall that I've been surprised by and do want to bring up here, is that I didn't realize to what degree researchers are under a lot of pressures to address certain topics or certain questions. So something that has come up in multiple of our answers is this kind of mandate for honesty.
Yeah.
It's like, as a journalist, you appreciate when people will give you straight answers, and Pranav was kind of mentioning a universality of research is this drive to uncover, the truth.
Yep.
But I'm not saying that we don't give you answers that are right from the scientific community. I'm just saying we may not always be asking the right questions.
Yeah.
And if you don't ask the question, how are you going to know the answer? And
yeah.
these pressures, I think, they're coming from politics. They're coming from funding agencies. They're coming from a lot of factors in terms of like resource availability, in terms of interest.
Yep.
And so what gets reported in mainstream media, what might cross a desk like yours,
Yep.
what might come to Energy Week, is not always the most impactful or even the most important question. And there's a long record of research being buried and uncovered later, even within this space.
Yep.
And I think that's something I was surprised to learn through the course of this project.
It's interesting. I was reading a book. I just finished a book about sort of the idea of we've kind of fallen in love with the eureka moment, right? But what actually happens in the lab is that you have incremental knowledge that's gained. And so much of it depends on the questions that you're asking, right? Like,
Correct.
so you're having to figure out, and this is me in Japan, right? Like, I'm asking all of the wrong questions. What am I
Exactly.
doing here? And y'all have to do that in the lab too, I imagine, where you have to figure out what the question is that you're supposed to be asking, because you're going to get the answer,
Right.
but the question might be wrong. You're exactly right. I'm curious about, from y'all's perspective, you had talked about sort of the things that come across my desk and the reasons that I report on some things. Often it's sort of something new, something novel. But what we're not doing a good enough job of is understanding, and I think the Energy Institute is doing a really nice job of thinking about this way more broadly. This idea of we need to get this research that's really, really important out to more people, right?
Right.
And so is that, and I want to ask you this as a journalist, but also from y'all's perspective as researchers, are we looking for the wrong things in the research to tell the stories about, or are y'all not doing a good enough job explaining to us exactly sort of what this matters, this sort of knock-on effects, like you were saying? How is this? What I'm going to have to do is explain to my editor, this is actually going to be implemented in a community, and it's going to affect this community. The stuff in the lab, my editor doesn't care about, right?
Yeah, sure.
Right.
And so is it a collaboration? Do we need to be more collaborative in, I'm leaning on you to tell me why I need to care? Is that where we need to go?
Yeah, I feel like communicating the nuances of research is definitely a challenging task, like
Sure.
especially when it comes to like complex topics like climate and energy. I think one thing that we can do better job is kind of being more transparent about the limitations of our work. Like
Okay.
again, I'm thinking more like from an experimental research perspective. Like every study has constraints, whether it's the scalability of the experiment or it's like the scalability of a solvent on an industrial scale,
Yep.
the assumptions that we make, or like the set of parameters that we are actually running. I think making them more clear and openly accessible is going to help prevent a lot of overgeneralization that ends up happening in media or journalism.
Okay.
And I feel it's also kind of important to distinguish between correlation and causation.
Sure.
I think that's a very important topic in research, especially in areas like carbon capture, where multiple factors are influencing the same outcome. It's not just A results to B, right? So I think like providing that context and acknowledging uncertainties with it, engaging in open dialogues with media as well as with the public kind of goes a long way in kind of building understanding and trust. And I feel that beyond even transparency and communication, it also depends on how research is kind of framed and perceived in like general audience. So I kind of wanted to know your views on this, Shashwati. How do you see this?
Okay, but y'all, when we discussed this panel, I asked Andy, how can we, as scientists, as researchers, communicate better with, the lay audience that you work with? And
Sure.
look at him flipping this question back to me now.
Yeah, right.
So,
No, it's
so
right.
before I take a stab at
Exactly
it, before I take a stab at it, I want to hear from your perspective, in particular about mistrust around research, around climate topics. Like, what do you think that we can do? And maybe as a journalist, what your perspective is on what you can do to combat that?
I think a lot of the problem is that we're not speaking to the people who are in the lab doing the research, right? Often we're speaking to communications departments, we're speaking to PR people who are trying to get their research out to the public because they think it's exciting and they think it's interesting and they also want grant money for, when you get on, an NPR program or whatever, it's good, right? It's good publicity. So from my perspective, what I need is somebody telling me I need them to tell me exactly why this research matters. But at the same time, I need them to make y'all available to break it down for me too, right? Because what I'm gonna do is pretty superficial because I have 3.5 minutes to explain the utilization, the U part of CCUS to an audience that's in Florida and Ohio and Texas, right? And so y'all are gonna have to help me do exactly that. So I'm gonna need you to break down. I'm gonna trust you because what I'm gonna have to do is make it seem superficial, but then I'm gonna lean on you and say, what is the stuff that I can't leave out? What is the stuff that absolutely has to be in there that helps me tell this story? And so I think that the communication barriers, and this is old school like communication stuff, right? Like I send an email to the comms person at a university because they're gonna put me in touch with who they think is going to be good for this. What y'all need to do is say, talk to your comms people, right?
Right.
And be like, hey, I need to be telling this story. And lean on them to help you tell it too, right? Cool.
Okay, Andy, can I workshop my 1
Sure.
minute research with you?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we take carbon dioxide and we make it into useful stuff.
Okay.
And that useful stuff is the plastics in those glasses on the table, the fabrics we're wearing, fuels you put into your car, they're all carbon-based.
Yep.
We only need water and renewable electricity to do this.
Okay.
But it's too expensive right now, so that's where my job comes in.
Okay.
Trying to bring down the costs, in particular trying to understand where those costs are coming from, and so how we can redesign these reactors that make chemicals from CO2.
So what are your asks from? Do you need support? Do you need subsidies from the government? What are your asks?
I guess it depends on who we're asking.
Okay.
I think in terms of funding and support, what we really need support for, like I was kind of mentioning, is how do you scale this stuff up? Like we can do this in the lab very
Sure.
successfully. Like Pranav and I have both worked on systems that are kind of bench scale. So this is I have a reactor that's about the size of my hand in the lab. How do you take that to a full-scale chemical plant? Well, you need to build something in between and see how the phenomena that are really important at the lab scale, like are they just as important the size of a desk? Are they just as important when you scale this up to the size of a room?
Okay.
So yeah.
So
that's
what you need to sell me is, hey, I have this thing that's happening that's really cool in a lab. What I'm trying to figure out is how to commercialize it, and then I'm offering these solutions, and I'm trying to get in touch with people who are. What the story ends up being for me, the through line for me ends up being, there's some really cool research happening, and they're making it happen in a lab. What these two scientists are trying to figure out is how to scale it and how to commercialize it. That's a story. That's a great little story.
Okay, I'm taking notes here.
Make it happen. That's all the time I got. Thank you guys so much.
Awesome.
These guys are great.